How good can a Forced by the Label Van Halen album be? Let's find out. What can you say about Van Halen that hasn't already been said? They were in a league of their own, copied mercilessly by millions, but matched by no one. The 1980s as we know it was created by these four guys before the decade even began. Their 1978 debut album is largely considered to be the bedrock of damn near all rock and metal to emerge since. And how can you argue? That album is a monumental piece of pop metal mastery, and it alone spawned more than a few subgenres. It was, to put it very lightly, revolutionary. Take for example Eruption. To the untrained ear you might think it's wank and serves no real purpose other than to massage the ego of by many accounts the greatest guitar player of all time, but in the late 70s it was nothing short of a hurricane coming through your speakers. No one played like that prior to 78. Which was the genius of Eddie Van Halen. No one could play quite like him, and believe me, many tried. His playing oozed a style and swagger, tossing out riffs like a gumball dispenser, and revolutionizing the instrument itself by designing his own guitars to fit him and his playing despite them looking a bit worse for wear afterwards. He invented the Superstrat as we know it, which has been copied time and time again for decades. He also helped design the PV5150 amplifier, which is an amp that is also iconic and revolutionary, and it's also been copied by many other companies for decades, and I'm sure for many decades to come. Eddie was one in a billion, and influenced so many guitar players all around the world, including myself. And it really just won't be the same without him anymore. So take this video as my belated tribute to the man and his music. But let's not forget about Eddie's older brother Alex on drums, who in any other band would be the highlight, but unfortunately is kind of overshadowed by his younger brother, which is a shame because he's a world-class drummer. Michael Anthony doesn't exactly set the world on fire with his bass playing. His main strength is his backing vocals, and he was the reason why Van Halen's background vocals were one of the best parts about this band. And of course, David Lee Roth, who acted as a ringleader to the circus that was classic Van Halen. What he may have lacked in singing ability, he more than made up with just his showmanship and dedication to bring a great show night after night. I mean, his stage raps is the stuff of legend.
Hey man, don't be squirting water at me. I'm gonna fuck your girlfriend, pal.
His vaudevillian antics set him apart from every other frontman of the era, and much like Eddie, he was copied by pretty much everyone who came after him. The first 6 albums this band did are generally considered to be as good as rock and metal ever got. Each album is pretty much flawless, filled to the brim with classic song after classic song, and each record has its fans that will say it's the best thing they ever recorded. With the exception of one. You see, by 1981, Van Halen were coming off the release of their 4th album, Fair Warning. An album which today is seen as arguably the finest moment of their entire career. By the time, it was seen as a disappointment following the albums that preceded it by many people. It was the slowest song of their career up to that point, and the band were dealing with internal struggles that would continue to wreak havoc on the band for decades to come. So they decided, hey, let's take a break so we can cool our jets, collect our bearings, and maybe even do some writing. Keep in mind the band were in a constant pattern of recording and touring since the late 70s, so you can understand why they would be burnt out. But Dave had the bright idea of recording a quick cover song to start off the year and to keep the band's name out there. Dave originally wanted to do Dancing in the Street, originally by Martha and the Vandellas, I believe it's pronounced, but Eddie couldn't figure out how to approach that song with his guitar. We'll come back to that later. So they instead settled on Roy Orbison's Oh Pretty Woman. They knocked it out in a single day at Sunset Sound in LA. It went on about their break until it started to climb up the charts and the label told them, you have a hit on your hands, you have to make an album, and the prospects of having a break went right down the shitter. So they went in to record an LP that just had the attitude of, ugh. It was the cheapest Van Halen record to make yet, costing barely 46 grand, and they weren't in the mood to write apparently, so 5 out of the 12 tracks were covers. That's almost half. But not counting the Little Guitar's intro, Cathedral, Intruder, and Happy Trails, which are barely songs, then it's 8 out of 4 tracks. Eddie lamented this by saying, "I would rather bomb with one of my own songs than get a hit with somebody else's." The album would be released in April of 1982, christened Diver Down. Now, the weird name Bizarre album cover may look odd until you realize it's the flag that is flown to indicate that a scuba diver is submerged. And it isn't as meaningless as some may believe. Dave said, and I quote at the time, "There was something going on that's not quite apparent to your eyes. You put up a red flag with a white slash. A lot of people approach Van Halen as sort of an abyss, whereas Neil Monk, the band's manager, said that the title was a simple double entendre, dive her down, dive her down, which, come on man." But let's take a further look into this album that many have claimed to be the weakest of the six-pack, and an album Eddie himself despised until the day he died. Let's first look at their cover of Pretty Woman. But before we get to that, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Okay, thanks, bye. Now, this song may not be the greatest fit for Van Halen because Roy Orbison is a bit of a geek. So the original comes across like a lustful loser who will never get with the titular Pretty Woman, and he sings each line like a wilting flower. Meanwhile, David Lee Roth is cool incarnate, and in those days could get any chick he wants. So he tones it down a bit and delivers a more, for lack of a better word, somber performance than he usually does. For the most part. This cover features Dave's signature croon that we've heard before in tracks like Women in Love and Little Dreamer, which I'm a big fan of. And something to consider is in the original, the guitar doesn't have much of a presence, barring the classic riff. The song is largely carried by the drums and Roy's sensitive voice, but from the first few seconds, you see that even though this is a cover, it's still Van Halen. Eddie adds his own signature flair to the main riff, but he also adds texture to the rest of the song by writing his own guitar parts, and even when he comes back to the original licks, he makes them his own. And the video, which also includes the song Intruder, because after the video was completed, they realized they didn't have enough song to go along with the weirdest fuck video they shot, so they went back into the studio and wrote this bizarre, jarring, and dissonant piece in about an hour. It shouldn't work with Pretty Woman as well as it does, but hey, that's the magic of this band in its classic form. And speaking of that video, oh boy. It was one of the first videos to ever be banned from MTV because it featured two little people sexually assaulting a woman who ends up being a transvestite. I can't say this has aged too well, but overall Pretty Woman was a great cover that was tastefully done, and the band did it while still making it their own. So let's take a look at the opening cut of this album, being Where Have All the Good Times Gone? Yet another cover, originally by the Kinks. Keep in mind this is the second time this band has covered the Kinks. But regardless, this in my opinion is the best cover this album has to offer. It retains the same swinging rhythm of the original, and Dave channels a similar swagger to Ray Davies, the backing vocals sound just as good, and Eddie wrote a solo and even a new opening riff that fits right in even though it's a cover. And honestly, this song to me is quintessential Van Halen anyway. Even though it has many elements of the original, they added enough of their classic spirit to make it their own. We then finally get an original tune with Hang 'Em High, and oh my god, it's so chaotic, I love it. It sounds like the band are walking precariously on a tightrope and they're about to fall. I especially dig how the vocals are double tracked, but they're ever so slightly out of sync with each other, which gives the song this unnerving quality to it. But as good as it is, it's tied back into how strapped for material the band was during this era. The song was dredged up from their old demos, and the only real difference between this and the demo is the lyrics and the verse vocal melody, and some of the solo, which isn't a great look. We also have Secrets, which is one of the more bizarre and experimental songs of this band's career. It's not quite a ballad, but it's not quite a rocker either. It's more of a trancey slow jam, and it sounds like the band's take on something early Pink Floyd might do. And even though it's kind of upbeat, there's an uneasiness to it that lingers under the surface that I can't quite put my finger on. Dave said he wrote the lyrics after getting ideas from those cheesy greeting cards you find that were written in the style of Indian poetry, which makes the lyrics sound kind of surreal and nonsensical, but they fit the music very well, especially when Dave hits those high notes and the song reaches a whole new level. Now it's been about 2 songs, time for another cover. This time it's of the previously mentioned Dancing in the Streets, and remember when I said Eddie didn't want to originally do it because he couldn't figure out how to approach it with his guitar? Well, the band's take on this R&B classic is less northern soul and more new wave. It keeps very little of the original song. In fact, everything apart from the lyrics are completely different. It reminds me of Devo's cover of Satisfaction. It doesn't stay very true to the original at all, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but the new elements they brought to it kind of detract from the song to begin with. Eddie is mainly playing with synths in this song, with only faint power chords being heard in the background and a guitar solo that kind of comes out of left field. I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad cover because it's not, but it just sounds so busy and muddled, and the synths are too loud and overbearing. The backing vocals are almost completely drowned out, and the bass is pretty much non-existent. Apparently the instrumental was written for something else completely different, and I believe it because it doesn't really fit too well. It's overall a clusterfuck in my opinion, and there's just too much going on. But Dave sells the performance, so it isn't all bad. But from that bum note, we get maybe my favorite Van Halen song of all time, Little Guitars. It starts with this really beautiful faux flamenco playing from Eddie, and when Dave heard it, he drew from Mexican and Spanish culture and wrote a song for the senoritas. Alex's drums are swinging in a way that never fails to get me moving, and the song is just chock full of hooks, from both the guitars and vocals. It's probably the poppiest song the band had recorded up until that point, but unlike something like Jump or I'll Wait that came later, or Dance the Night Away that preceded it, Little Guitars has an exotic flavor to it that I can't help but love. It's as close to a serenade as this band ever got, and I crack a smile every time I hear it. It's just the perfect song in my opinion. As soon as you think it's over, the band add yet another element that take it to the next level each and every time. I can't say enough good things about it. Just go ahead and listen to it. This song I recommend more than anything else off the record. The next song is a cover of Big Bad Bill of Sweet William Now, which was originally written way back in the 20s and by Jack Yellen and Milton Agar, I believe it's pronounced, and it has been covered and performed by countless artists including Peggy Lee and Merle Haggard. And Van Halen's version is definitely the most true to the original cover they've ever done. All I'm saying is that it sounds like it was recorded long before 1982. And definitely the best thing about this song is the clarinet, which was actually played by Jan Van Halen, Eddie and Alex's dad, who used to be a jazz cat back in his day if I'm not mistaken. Apparently he was very self-conscious about his skill at the instrument because it had been some time since he had last played, but when this was recorded the band reassured him that it was okay because mistakes happen and they make it more real. And believe it or not, it was actually Dave's idea to get Jan on the track, and it's really wholesome, I just love it. And you might be thinking, hey, we've almost finished listening to this fucking record, and all we've gotten is some weird experimentation and some covers. When are we gonna get Van Halen as we know them? The best part of a man. The Full Bug is a Van Halen rocker to the nth degree. Eddie setting the fretboard on fire, Dave's fucking you through the mic, and it has that quintessential party energy that this band can do like no other. This song was made to be played loud and with a bottle of Jack Daniels in your hand. The lyrics are classic Dave too. Total dirtbag poetry, and the harmonica solo adds to the sleaze of this song. And with the band's take on an old show tune called Happy Trails to bookend this album, I can't help but wonder why this album is met with such disdain. Is it perfect? Hell no, it's definitely the weakest out of the six-pack, and there's way too many covers, I agree, but in my opinion it's still a very pleasant experience, and I would argue that they were quite bold for the experimentation on this album. At the time, critics were calling Van Halen a one-trick pony, but people quickly snapped to their senses once they heard songs like Jump, and a lot of the elements that would make 1984 so successful can be heard on Diver Down, albeit in a fetal form, but it's there nonetheless. And Eddie in particular has been very critical of this album in retrospect, As said previously, he had a big problem with all the covers. And you know what's funny, it says that when the band's debut single and first hit was a cover of You Really Got Me. And they opened Van Halen 2 with a cover of You're No Good, originally by Dee Warwick. Not to mention how they used to play covers all the times back in the clubs. And even at the time, in interviews promoting Diver Down, he told critics to fuck themselves if they had a problem with the covers on the album. Not to mention, I find it kinda disrespectful that Eddie badmouthed this album as much as he did since his own father played on it. Did he just forget that or something? But anyway, Diver Down was a low point for Van Halen. It sold decent numbers and the tour did well, but it was considered disappointing by many people and seen as a glorified covers record that was slapped together for a quick profit. And to that I say, hey, it's only half cover, shut up. But I can't really deny the rest of that statement. It's by no means a masterpiece, and it's probably the weakest out of the Dave Lee Roth albums, but that's a testament to the quality of this band's early output. Most of their covers are at least enjoyable, and the originals, while less daring than they have been in the past and future, are still classic. And let's not forget that Van Halen are capable of much worse. So anyways, tell me what you think in the comments. You can click right here for more metal and hard rock videos, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell to remain notified and to support the channel. Anyways, take it easy party people. And don't forget to dislike if you're pissy about that Van Hagar diss. Dave to the grave, mother.